And so, yeah, it was never like, hey, go to a C here instead of a fucking B, you know? It was always, that's a better chorus, that's a better bridge, put that together. We got into the weeds of that in the actual recording process where, you know, we definitely had heavy pre-pro sessions for them.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Record Process. This week, we got a chance to talk with bassist Chris Barker, aka Chris No.2, of the legendary punk band Anti-Flag. We zeroed in on the band's 2006 major label debut, For Blood and Empire. This record is a hugely anthemic and iconic piece of work in the punk scene, and there was so much to unpack here. Chris was kind enough to take time away from his off day while the band was touring in Europe and the UK recently to sit down with us and unpack a ton of behind-the-scenes stories about how the record came to be. Things like working with producer-engineer Dave Schiffman and pulling in their good friend Mike Ski from the AKAs to do the art direction for the album. We talk about how the political climate at that time heavily influenced the lyrics, as they always do with Anti-Flag albums, and how the involvement of Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine pitching the band to Rick Rubin actually led to a major label bidding war that ended with the band signing to RCA. Chris is such an incredibly genuine human being, as are the rest of the band members. I know you're going to enjoy this, so let's get into it. When the world shut down in 2020, musicians and producers everywhere were forced to re-examine and reimagine their creative process. Without the possibility of in-person studio collaboration, the future of music production was anything but certain. But as the old saying goes, where there's a will, there's a way. And for those professionals who were determined to never compromise on the quality of their audio, the world-class engineers at Audio Movers established that way. By combining the HD streaming of lossless multi-channel audio straight from your DAW with the unique ability to adjust latency and bitrate, Listen To stands as the solution to unlocking global creativity in music production. Its power has been felt on Grammy Award-winning albums and on over 85% of all modern Abbey Road studio sessions. So stop letting your physical location dictate the quality of your work and the projects within your reach. For a free trial, just follow the link in our show notes and use the code PROCESS to receive 10% off the first year of your membership. Listen, if you're an artist or musician still struggling to find a better way to distribute and promote your music, and you haven't checked out DistroKid yet, then that needs to jump straight to the top of your to-do list. We are proud to have them back with us for another season of The Record Process, primarily because they, just like us, are committed to empowering and supporting independent artists like you. DistroKid is by far the most affordable service for distributing your music to all digital streaming platforms, and it comes with a bunch of tools to help you elevate your career in a ton of crucial ways. DistroKid not only allows you to spread your music across the streaming ecosystem, regardless of what platform might be top of your focus right now, but it also helps you share your story with labels using their unique upstream tool. You can engage with your fan base using DistroKid's text messaging feature, and they'll even help you create unique lyric videos that can help you promote your music better online. As a Record Process listener, you can get 30% off of your first year's membership just by heading to the show notes and signing up using our affiliate link there. And remember, we always love hearing what you're working on and how tools like DistroKid are helping you create some incredible moments for your fan base. So please don't hesitate to share them with us. And now, here's our interview. Chris Barker and or Chris 2, welcome to The Record Process. We are so happy to have you here. And on tour, no less. You literally just got in from Europe. You're in the UK. Where are you at?
Yeah, so I don't really know because I thought I was going to Birmingham. And then I got into this van and then they were like, we'll be there in an hour, which is when I panicked and texted you like, oh shit. So I am an hour from Birmingham, somewhere close to 2,000 Trees, right, which is a festival in the UK. And that's where we play tomorrow. It's been a whirlwind. I mean, travel right now is insane. Like every flight is delayed. Every person at the airport is the worst version of themselves that they've ever been. It's been challenging. And somewhere in the pandemic, I did probably a Zoom interview comparable to this, where I said something along the lines of like, I'd give anything to be back in Europe. I'll take the worst travel in the world. And now I'm paying the penance.
You know what? I will tell you for sure that nobody in my band uttered those words in regard to a European tour. And you and I have, and this is one thing that I respect about it, because your European travels with Anti-Flag, much different than a lot of the anecdotes and we've had some great times. We've played some incredible festivals like Grows Rock, Monster Bash. 2000 Trees is also an awesome UK fest. So I'm jealous that you brought that up and that's where you will be tomorrow. But yeah, so all that being said, aside from the fact that what you just described, getting into the hotel and everything, sounded more like the introductory scene of a Liam Neeson movie than anything. And I wanted to be like, dude, are you okay? Who is driving the van? Are you safe?
I'm blinking 3 times.
Yeah. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you hear.
Yeah.
I mean, touring in its own ways and traveling can be hectic, but so we can't overstate how appreciative we are, because we thought it would be just so amazing to get your insights and your take and the story behind what is, I mean, a fan favorite record, but also an incredibly impactful record, just not only for y'all's career as a band, but just for the genre and greater movements at large. Truthfully, the 2006 album For Blood and Empire. Talk to us about where y'all were at as a band leading up to the making of that record, which I believe you recorded in 2005, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So we had this moment happen, and I think that it's something that you'll understand and appreciate. And I think that most people that are passionate about something or use whatever skill set within their hands to create something will also understand. We were in this moment where just like everything was just flowing out of us so quickly. And so this was about 2003. We made a record called The Terror State, and that was our second record for Fat Records. And everything kind of like a switch flipped, like everything changed. Punk rock as a whole was growing. There was this massive anti-war and protest movement happening in America, which we were proud to be a part of. None of us knew that we would be as right as we were going into it, but we knew that something felt off about America's bloodthirst and vengeance in the wake of September 11, 2001. And we wanted to just like really pump the brakes and make sure that the decisions that were being made by the powerful at that time were the right ones. And, you had, where we're from in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, you had 350,000 people in the streets protesting the war in Iraq. And it was just, we're a city of 300,000. So 50,000 more people came, So it just was tremendously inspiring. And so that was the first kind of inkling that we were on the right path, making that record. And consistently, I think up until now, that's the version of the band we want to be. We want to manipulate and almost subvert the consciousness of the listener and write the catchiest, hookiest song we can write. But later on, you go back and you're like, oh, these assholes are talking about something much bigger than what the 4 chords and the sloganeering is saying. And so, we had a lot of major label interest in The Terror State, but it was a record that we had given to our friends at Fat. We weren't interested in selling it to anybody. We had a lot of offers to do so, none of which we really took seriously until Rick Rubin called. And it was really funny. He called me and he's like, hello, is this Anti-Flag? And I was like, I guess I'm Anti-Flag. Yeah, sure. Who is this? And he's like, my name's Rick Rubin. Tom Morello played me your album because Tom was kind of our spiritual guru and executive producer of The Terror State. And he was playing it for some people once it was finished. And Rick said, I love your band. I want to see you play. And so, we booked a show at the Roxy in LA, literally the next day. And, 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, we flew out and played the show. Rick, like a Batman supervillain, showed up right before we played, came backstage, said, I love the show. I want to sign the band. I'll be in touch. And then went out the back door of the Roxy, and there was a car waiting for him. He didn't text anybody. He didn't call. I don't know how, it's just like the mystique is real, And so we were like, fuck, we might have to sign to a major label. And that began a pretty intense bidding war for the band that ended up with us signing to RCA Records. And I don't want to get too in the weeds of the major label stuff, because that's not what this is about. But it definitely was the perfect storm, because we had already had For Blood and Empire essentially written. And so we felt at a very advantageous place going into the major label deal, where it was like, well, we know this Anti-Flag record is going to sound like Anti-Flag. We're not writing it for an audience or for a label or for anyone else. We've already made it. It's just about who wants to be involved in it. And truthfully, we took the best deal, and that was literally a 2-record deal on RCA Records, that we were free to go after the second record, and that's what we did. And so that was collectively, we saw it as our rock and roll swindle moment, where we knew what we were doing going into it, and we just got everything we could out of it. We built a studio in Pittsburgh out of it. We made the subsequent 3 records post ourselves because of it. We stole the knowledge we took from things. And my only regret is that Rick Rubin wasn't involved, because when I listen back to For Blood and Empire, there are a few songs that I wonder if he would have taken us to another stratosphere. But I also know that I've had a lot of friends who've made records with him that nothing great really happened either. So not everything he touches turns to gold, unfortunately. But yeah, it was a really great and important time in the band's life. And those songs now, specifically the Press Corps and This Is the End and $1 Trillion, like the quote unquote singles from the album, they're staples of the show. And it's nice that that's a record that came out in 2006 when the band's first record came out in 1996. And so to have us we have a lot of contemporaries, and I'm not trying to talk shit, but we have a lot of contemporaries that don't get to play songs that didn't come out in the 90s. And so for us, the fact that we learned that skill set in 2006, and it's something we carry to us today, we're like, arguably, we have these tentpole records of Die for the Government in 96, For Blood and Empire in 2006, and now like 2017 American Fall, 2020 Vision, our last record. Like, we're able to be the best version of our band because of those lessons that we learned along the way. And I assume that we'll get into some of those lessons.
Oh, there is so much to dive into. What an incredible picture you have painted. And that's kind of why I wanted to start there, because above all, I think, Chris, at least to me, but I know plenty of other people who are extreme fans of your band, that I think what is clear, especially about that 10-year period that led to the release of this record, is that your band exemplifies what I like to call the why behind the what. It's always guided by the moment and the things that you feel wholeheartedly are important. And I think that has probably a whole lot to do with where it has gone, and the fact that y'all are still there, still touring Europe, and still have people that are as passionate about these songs as they were the day that they came out, right? And the day that they heard them in that time and place, because there's an importance to it, not just a nostalgia for the old, right? Anti-Flag is a band that seems to live and breathe in conversation with the moment and the world around it. And I think that's something I've always loved about it. And that's why I think understanding how this record came to be and what it meant, it is important to go back, because, you mentioned, so in an interesting turn, this was the first major label release, right? And I think a lot of, we've talked about this briefly in many different ways, but, for a band like yourselves, coming off of Fat, making a lot of records with friends, and, not having to answer to too many expectations or whatever, everybody, I think the conversation and the cliche is to assume that the second a band signs to a much larger scale label, then expectations and pressure shift, and that impedes the work. And I think what's one of the biggest things that I heard you say in there that's interesting to me is that this record was already written. And I think bringing that to light and understanding that you being the band that you were and believing in the songs and the music that you were making is what got labels, what got people like Rick and Tom and all of these other, I loved it, like spiritual gurus and Sherpa and everybody. It was that authenticity that led you to that point and that moment where everybody started really like, there's no way that you can't buy in because when you see something that honest and that apparent. So I wanted to just kind of take that snapshot of that time and place, because then also obviously the things that were happening in the world are directly laid out across this record. Right. So I'm wondering, because we will definitely get to the recording portion of this, right, and the making of the music. But I think with Anti-Flag, you got to start with the inspiration and what y'all are trying to do and where these songs come from, because that is so much of, what the band is and the legacy that it has. So let's start there and kind of, get into that and how that landed with all of the different collaborators and everybody that came into fold on the record side of things.
Yeah. And I look forward to that because it's the least spoken about part of Anti-Flag is the music, but that's because we're so passionate about what's driving us. And frankly, it's not that important, but I do think that in terms of like, there is a craft and there is the 10,000 hours thing and all of that does come into play. So I think it's worth noting, but ultimately you got to understand when we signed to the major, there was no American Idiot. We thought we were going to do that. And it's just interesting to me that when you look at the records next to each other, they're both this red, white, and black. And they're both like, there's so many comparable similarities and I love Green Day. Like they're the most important band to me. I wouldn't be speaking to you today if I didn't see a guy on TV with fucked up teeth and pimples and think, I've got that. I can do that. and that right. was the gateway drug to all of it, So I think that when you just look at the politics of For Blood and Empire, especially versus the politics of American Idiot, one's a political punk record and one's not. It's got a couple tunes on it that are important, but like, I think that that's the biggest thing, going back to that hanging Chad of the Rick Rubin thing, is I wonder, would this record culturally, not just subculturally of punk rock, but culturally be looked at more as at least a noted footnote in anti-war music at that time. And I think now people are looking back on it and going like, oh shit, these guys were doing something real. It's a 35-page booklet that comes with literally extrapolations and essays for every song that break down the politics and the messaging behind each piece. And for me, like, that was a lesson that we learned for our first Fat record, because when we signed to Fat in 1999 and we graduated from just our buddies' labels, it was like, well, this is a platform and we need to use it. And so we spent Fat's money to do that. And then the biggest lesson happened with that first Fat record. We saw Good Riddance, we saw NoFX, we saw Lagwagon, and they were a league above us in terms of DIY punk at that time. And we thought if we signed to Fat on a Wednesday, Thursday, the world is different. It doesn't happen that way. And so when the major label sat us down and said, well, your world's going to be different the day this album comes out, we said, the fuck it is. We just did this and it didn't work. We had to do the work ourselves. And so every time that they pushed back on points of the contract by guaranteeing an exposure or an open door to X, Y, or Z, we just simply pushed back with, look, we had a bigger budget and the record only did what it did. We actually sold more copies on the fucking shitty DIY label than we did on the first Fat record. Like, you can't tell us that. We're not going to believe it. And I think that had a huge impact in defining our relationship with the label at that time, and specifically our headspace about the importance of the politics of the album. We took money from RCA Records and each one of us donated to a organization that we cared about. I bought a PA for the local DIY venue in Pittsburgh. We started a nonprofit organization called Military Free Zone with RCA money, and that combated a piece of legislation in the No Child Left Behind Act that gave military recruiters access to high school kids' records without them knowing. Shit. It was an opt-out program. When I went to school, you had to fill the little card out and give it to them. They changed that in 2004. And so we said, well, let's fight this. And sure enough, we got with Congressman Jim McDermott, who appears on the last track of the record, and got that piece of legislation overturned. Even pulled out as a great piece of footage from C-SPAN where there's a photo of Anti-Flag and he's talking about us on the Capitol Hill floor. And I'm just like, we wouldn't have had that legitimacy without the major label. So when you get into these circles, you can see that there are ways to do it. I'm not so sure that there is a way to usurp capitalism within a capitalist system. And so, I don't want to wax too heavily about that. But I also think that if you go back and actually look at the achievements of the band, the places we were able to reach at that moment, they were above our pay grade. And no one should have been listening to us. But the fact that we had RCA records on the back of it, the fact that we had the publicist that we had, and then the fact that we had the knowledge and the information compacted into the album so that when we did the interview on Fox News alongside Toby Keith, and he said he's going to put a boot in our ass. It was great because we were able to list stats about depleted uranium munitions being used in Iraq and Afghanistan and leading to birth defects. And all he could say was, I'm going to put a boot in your ass because America's number one. Like, it was, that knowledge was valuable to us. And so that time and that energy and frankly, like a lot of tears and a lot of fear and a lot of anger all went into it. And I'm grateful that we did that work at that time because it set a precedence for our band going forward.
Dude, there is so much there. And that is exactly why I say where it's like that why accounted for all of the choices that led you there, that gave you that, and then ultimately also leads you and guides you into the music making process of putting these records together, right? And who you choose to surround yourself with. If I'll say, I'd love to, then start. You mentioned Tom Morello bringing, for those that somehow aren't familiar listening to this, of Rage Against the Machine fame, also a band very notable for their outspoken thoughts on the ways of the world, right? I'm wondering how that relationship came to be and what that kind of gave you and what part of the process in getting to this record Tom had, if any, if just a friend or a creative collaborator.
So we met Tom in 1999 when we did half of the Battle of Los Angeles tour. The band had factioned off at that point. It was kind of like some dark days for Rage. And so we were Tom's band. At the drive-in was Zach's band. And at the drive-in opened half of the shows and we opened half of the shows. And the band collectively could agree on Gangstar. So I think Gangstar was on the whole tour. But, Tom's got a really funny story and he tells it anytime we're near each other where he was trying to get a hold of us to do the Battle of Los Angeles tour and he couldn't. And we just had like a P.O. box on our records. That's all we had. And for us, we were like, dude, we were called Anti-Flag and it was a hard time to make that statement at that period of the world. We didn't want people to find us, And so ultimately, somehow he gets in contact with the record label that we had at that time, which was Go-Kart Records in New York City. I actually had saw the Guerrilla Radio video on TV earlier that week, and I called the label the same day saying we should find out if we know anyone who knows anyone and get Rage Against the Machine Anti-Flag albums. And so when I got a call back from the label, I was like, did you get my message about Rage? And he's like, no. How do you know they want to take you on tour? It literally was the same. It was like cosmically incredible. So we did those dates and Tom just took us under his wing then. And you fast forward to 2003 when we're making Terror State. I remember it might be before your time. There was a big show in DC for the radio station called BFD, I believe. It was like at RFK Stadium, and it was like all of the rock of the day was playing, and Audio Slave was playing, and that was the closest he was. So we drove with a CD of, 30 some songs, and Tom just ripped them apart and essentially told us which ones were the paths to go down, which ones were the ones to avoid. And that just, he opened we were like vampires. He opened the door and let us in, and then he never got rid of them.
Chris, we talk about feedback as songwriters and creatives so much. Obviously, it's like a huge pillar of this show and of the stories, that we tell about records and stuff. That's a serious source of feedback, if ever there was one, especially with what, just him as a guitar player, right? Him as an activist, just all of those things, like a creative mind and that history and that experience. That's a pretty incredible and pretty powerful place to start, huh?
Surprisingly, cares very little about the musicianship. It's all about the songs. He wants the song. And that is what we learned from him. I mean, we met Billy Bragg. I want to say I was very new in Anti-Flag when we went and saw the show. So I had to be about 16 years old. And we gave him one of the early records, which sounds atrocious. And he frankly just told us, he's like, dude, you catch more flies with honey. And said, if you want to change the world, write a better song. And it really shifted our scope of, punk rock is aesthetically disruptive, to maybe it can be a great song. And maybe it's more in line with where the Clash were headed and where they ended up than it is with where the more noisy, the more disruptive and uncomfortable settings that were aesthetically happening in punk rock at that time. Especially in the mid 90s, whenever Anti-Flag was playing, it was about who can play the fastest and who could be the most savage. And for us, we were never great players, and we were learning how to play through this entire process, where that's why I actually think we're the best version of Anti-Flag we've ever been, because we actually know how to play now, and we're better at writing that song we were trying to write when Die for the Government came out. And I still love that song. That's the thing. Those inspirations are still the same inspirations. So that lesson from Tom was very valuable, where, I think that people have this idea of Rage Against the Machine as, either his guitar playing or Zach's rapping or the ferocity of the live show. But when you get down to it, that is a song, and they've written great songs. And that's where all of their power has come from. And so, those were valuable lessons from heroes of ours, and that feedback that you're talking about is tremendously important. And so, yeah, it was never like, hey, go to a C here instead of a fucking B. It was always, that's a better chorus. That's a better bridge. Put that together. We got into the weeds of that in the actual recording process, where, we definitely had heavy pre-pro sessions for them. So those songs that were written in 2003 manipulated a little bit by the time we hit record, but ultimately it was just like, it was a band who had been on the road for 200 days straight, and then in the studio the other 165 of those days. So we were good. We were good versions of ourselves at that time.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I want to talk more about the recording process of For Blood and Empire. One, what studio was it at? And two, what was the session like? If y'all were super hot, coming off the road, was it cut live and just get into the weeds of it?
Yes and no. I actually had hoped to do a little refresher for my memory before this, but I didn't quite get to it in the band ride here in my hour band ride. But I know that we tracked all the drums at Sunset Sound. Again, we were embracing the major label budget at that point, because what we learned from our A&R person was that they weren't going to not let us spend the money. There was this belief that you get what you pay for. And so we had a dog-eared budget, and he just basically told us, you're going to have to spend that. Like that's where they believe a record costs. And it might be archaic at this time, especially Pro Tools was happening. So people were making records faster. It was still pretty new. We had never really experienced making a digital album before, but this album was our first interaction with a Pro Tools editor. So we did cut the drums and bass live, and actually we've kept that to this day. That's how Pat and I we're locked and we record that shit together. Like I'll then play to him, like recut the bass to him. So yeah, the drums were going into this little dark room where this poor person named Dana was just editing drums for hours and hours and hours. Well, they would come back out of the room and we'd be like, this sounds great. You know? So, I don't know what he was doing in there, but it took a very long time. And now, like, especially like just finishing a record with somebody who is so proficient at Pro Tools, like I'm like, that person would have been done with our album in a day. Like, I don't know what the fuck you were doing in there, but it must have been really hard in 2005 to edit Pro Tools because
they were figuring it out. Hey, it's like, it doesn't matter, you know, how long it took or what it took, as long as it comes out and you're just like, yep, that's it. Sounds great. You know, you didn't butcher it.
Yeah.
Taking a minute here to shout out our good friends at Sheet Happens Publishing. Back with us again for season 3. They are a company that works directly with artists to create accurate and immersive tab books, vinyl, and other merch that allows fans to get one step closer to perfecting the soundtrack of their lives. As many of you may know, I had the pleasure of working side by side with them to put together a book for my band, The Wonder Years, and believe me, they are incredibly thorough and always dedicated to artist-approved accuracy in every one of their books. Every tab book comes with the accompanying guitar profiles, which allow you to jump right into playing along with all of your favorite tracks. So all you need to do is head over to sheethappenspublishing.com to check out everything they have to offer, and be sure to enter the code TRP15 at checkout for 15% off your first purchase. Or you can find the link in our show notes, and again, that's promo code TRP15. What room at Sunset? Because we did Sister Cities at Sunset Sound, which is actually the only record that we've also tracked like 80% of live.
Oh, cool.
Ironically enough, such a legendary studio. And yes, well, you only really get that room if there is a budget or some resources or favors there, of course. And that much is known by the wall of like gold and platinum records that you see when you walk in. But I'm curious, because the interesting thing about that is there's like 3 separate like huge rooms there.
Yeah.
And there's always shit happening.
I think we were in B, which is the biggest room.
Yeah, the very high ceilings.
Yeah. So I'm 99% sure that's what we did. And so the goal was to record the whole thing there. We were living at the Jokewood, which is the Oakwood Apartments. And, you know, like AFI was making the Miss Murder album at the same time. No. They were making the Girls Not Grey album, whichever one that is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were there too. It felt like very important, you know, like it was like every apartment in the Oakwood complex was some band who was making some record, and you felt like you were a part of something, even though like we didn't really interact much because we were all working hella long days, you know, like easily 10 to 12 hour days every day in the studio. And so the person who recorded it was Dave Schiffman, and Dave Schiffman was Rick Rubin's main engineer at the time. And so that's what we got out of our deal with Rick Rubin was he told us about Dave being great. And so whenever we didn't go with Rick, it was like, well, let's just get Dave. Apparently Dave does all the work anyways. So it's one of the first albums that he has a producer credit on. Before that, he was just an engineer, and now he's fucking killing it. Like he did the new Pup record, or has done the last 2 Pup records, I believe. And obviously he's done some stuff for Thrice and some other really cool contemporary bands of all of ours. But Dave was great. He was a company man. He was afraid of the label at the time. I don't think he's that way anymore. I think he touched the stove and got burnt by it a couple times.
Yeah.
But, I do remember like we wanted all of the tapes and he wouldn't give them to us. We were like, these are our songs, fucking give them to us. And he's like, no, they go into the Sony vault. And
they're the label songs now.
Yeah. I was like, we didn't like that answer. So I do know that the only bit of drama was, and it probably had a lot to do with him being a company man and Pat, our drummer, being such a contrarian. But eventually he kicked Pat out of the studio because they were butting heads. And Pat, bless his heart, he is so committed to the thing. And the politics are what drives it. And the message is what drives it for him. And he cares so little about music. And he's so focused on, is the song achieving the goal, that sometimes you'll speak a different language in terms of communicating what you want out of the song. And that was happening. And we were fried. I mean, it took us 3 months to make this album. We eventually ran out of the budget money and had to go to another place to finish guitars and vocals. I can't remember where that is. That's the place I wanted to look up. And then, there were some crazy things that happened at that time. Like, we were going to have Winston Smith do the artwork, and Winston Smith is famous for doing the Dead Kennedys. He created this. Yeah. And he also did Green Day, Insomniac, the collage of that. Yeah. But he was all analog. And so you didn't know what you were going to get. And he was very expensive. We had this conversation and he came up with a concept that we weren't totally in love with. It's actually funny. It's an image that literally like 6 or 8 months later after the album came out was used by Coldplay for the album of their cover, which it's like Lady Liberty leading the people. She's on the boat holding the flag. He wanted to do that, but he was like, I don't put your faces on it. And we're like, we don't love that. But I'm sure it would have been sick because he's just such an incredible artist. So we actually had to fly out a homie of all of ours, Mike Ski, from Philadelphia, who does True Hand Society and is a tremendous tattoo artist. In the 11th hour, we needed this album artwork. And so I had this idea of doing the White House with these unknown soldier graves in front of it. And like, I was just like, we need to sit down and do this. So we flew him to the studio while we were finishing guitars and vocals and literally did the artwork layout concept in like 24 hours. And then he was back on a flight to go make it at home. So it was like some crazy shit that was only going on at that time. But yeah.
Dude, that is amazing. That is like to have to be able to be living so inside of the record and pull in that creative. Like a lot of times it's either, after the fact or, concurrently, but like outside of it, like nowadays, like via email or like a few phone calls, text, like having some storyboard directions. But to have Mike there, like a friend at that point, be able to sit down with you in the same room and kind of sketch stuff out and lay things out and play with stuff has got to be awesome.
And hear the songs, right? And be a part of the album. Yeah, yeah. So that's a move that we now do. Like literally, so the artists for our last 3 albums, or now the 4th one, because he just did this new one, is a great friend of mine. His name's Doug Dean, and he lives in Pittsburgh as well. And I bring him in as early as possible. So he's either in the demo stage or he is in having a band meeting with us, like as we are finishing writing the songs. Again, the song is just a vehicle for the idea. And so I want every piece of the record to communicate that idea. So yeah, I mean, I think that was a valuable lesson because you're right. It used to be up until For Blood and Empire, it was, okay, we finished the album. We send it to an artist. An artist gives us a visual representation of what he thinks our art is about. And, a lot of times it's just like, here's a cop and he's posterized out in black and white and he looks like a bad guy.
Can be a little tropey. Yeah, I would imagine if you go, yeah, totally.
So making political art, you can really get boxed in and it becomes difficult we've been fighting so many of these battles for so long. How are you lending anything else to the conversation that is both at the same time very nuanced, but also very sloganeering in black and white? And that is always the challenge. That's the challenge of the music. That's the challenge of the lyric. That's the challenge of the artwork. And, frankly, sometimes we take a swing and we miss. I feel like at that moment, that was a swing where we hit, and which is why I believe it's lasting longer than I am.
Hey, there has to be something to it, right? So, however many million people can't be wrong. Trying to quantify the reach at this point that those songs have had, I think is a near impossible task, just because of the ripple effect, right? Which is astounding in its own right. But I love the fact too, that in doing that and seeing how that became a part of your process that you learned on this album. But not only that, talking about how do you make something speak in conversation so it feels holistic and feels new and interesting and feels like the fans are a part of it, right? And remembering, and sometimes I think it's very like, how do I sound saying this, and here are these thoughts and and directives, when really like these songs kind of start to give a voice to people and a shared, like they become these anthemic songs, which, like you mentioned, it's like write a better song. That's such an incredible way of looking at it. And it's like, hey, a lot of people can tell the same exact story. One person might ramble on and on forever, but if another person has it really dialed in, that story's going to win. That story's going to track with people. And that, I mean, it goes to oral tradition, right? Passing things down. You had to figure out a way that someone could literally just remember that story that some elder just told you, right? And that's why they get refined in the way they do. And I think this is a perfect example of what you're saying, is distilling these ideas in these conversations, taking the nuance that really sticks with people and really is decidedly, where you are and where the band is coming from and what's important and how they see it, or how it can be seen that maybe isn't. And writing those stories in anthemic ways that stick with people, I think is so powerful. And then taking the artwork approach. And on this record, I love the idea that you reach through, and I'm curious whose idea this was, but I'd love to talk about the stencils real quick too, that you did with it, because I think that's such a neat idea. And I think it's very easy to lose a lot of those physical characteristics of the tangible product of a record of old with streaming. So I'd love you to mention and talk about that a little bit too, because what a cool idea.
Yeah, I'm going to dance around a couple things really quickly though.
Yeah.
So I'm currently in this process where I'm navigating exactly what you just talked about, abating the archaic sensibilities within me that I got from the Dead Kennedys whenever I was 15, and I got Bedtime for Democracy, and I pulled it open, and there was an entire newspaper. It was called Fucked Facts. And you would go through this newspaper and you would put the LP on and you would experience this thing that is so, it's, everything. It's the Onion. It's fucking left-wing Democracy Now. It's like all of the information, all of the satire, and all of the fuck you aesthetic that I needed. And so I've been doing that since 2006 in For Blood and Empire, where we really were like, we've got the ability to do it. It's not just me cutting stuff out in my house anymore and putting it in an album. RCA is giving us the budget. So you go talk about the stencils. In 2003 on Fat Records, we had, it's called an O card, and it goes over top of your CD jewel case. And inside it, if you peeled it apart, there was some dotted lines for you to cut out your own stencil. Fast forward to this RCA budget, it's perforated.
Hey, hey, big spender.
Exactly. So that was our upgrade, and it's consistently about what's the upgrade? What is giving the person the tool? And so for us, like Pat, our drummer, came up with the idea for the Gunstar, and we had also legend in political art design, John Yates from Steelworks. He took Pat's idea of the Gunstar, turned it into something. And then Chris Head, our guitar player, who's also a great artist, he put the finishing touches on it. And that became like the mainstay for the band for a really long time, up until we got with Doug. And Doug was like, I think you can change your logo every record. And I think you can do that. And we were like, holy shit, you can? Like we come from this old school where the Dead Kennedys DK.
Right. You get one chance at it.
The Black Flag bars or the Black Flag.
Yep. Yeah.
So that was eye-opening, to think about, wow, each record could have its own era and its own identity for the band. So yeah, coming up with those type of ideas, and now fast forwarding to now where everything's experienced in the digital sphere. And I'm still, I literally just finished the essays for the new album, and I'm like, how do I get people to see this? Because it's going in the vinyl, but a lot of people are buying the vinyl because it's limited and they don't really engage with it in the same way. And it's in the CD, but the only folks that are buying the CD are folks of a certain age, and so I'm not quite sure I have the answer yet. We've got a few people who are smarter than ourselves that we're bouncing this stuff off of to see what that next way of doing it, whether it's fucking infographics and they're online or what, like all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, like, I don't think about things in terms of, like whether to our detriment or not. We've never called the people that engage with our band fans. They're as important to the equation as we are. And so because of that, breaking down that barrier, paramount in everything we do. The kiss and the curse of that is there's no mystique, everything is to be given to you. And so I think that leads to the people that engage with the band. They might not be like hunting for the thing. Mm-hmm. They're so used to it coming right to them. And so that is a challenge that this has created. And I think that Casey, your band is fantastic at the Easter egg and the hunt and sharing things in a way that the audience members will communicate amongst themselves about it. That's not a very anti-flag thing. We're just like, yo, here's what we're trying to say. And this is, it's like, we're not leading the horse to water. We're drowning the motherfucker. so I think in some, there are many ways to get there, and so it's just about navigating those lanes to the best of our ability. So when it comes to that type of stuff, album art and packaging, I am still a bit archaic about it. And I still do think about that experience of sitting down with it. Our numbers are lower in terms of I remember distinctly it was for Blood and Empire. There was a lengthy reading list at the end. And I remember interacting with people who would bring those books to the shows and be like, thanks for this. And that happens less now. But you also look at it and you're like, well, that's a record that sold 250,000 physical copies. And then here are these other ones that do not do that anymore, so. And
what's tough too, because I think, what you're kind of touching on there is that the shift, it now turns to like metrics on a screen in the way we try to capture how much of an impact and how much of a reach what gets made. And these, ultimately what you're trying to do with an album or any kind of art is create an experience, right? So realistically, it's just, instead of the term fan, it's the audience or the consumer of that experience, right? And you're curating that in different ways. Sometimes it's very heavy curation. Sometimes it's very free form, like abstract art versus very direct, very vivid, fine point, type stuff, right? There are people out there that think in both of those ways, that enjoy, no mystique. I want to know every little nuance, every little detail. That's, what makes the biggest impact. And then people that are like, hey, I want you to give me an idea. And I'm the kind of person, I just want to sit with it and let my thoughts go nuts. Right. And it's understanding who can hear it and who is looking for it. Right. And so maybe, the people that are listening to Anti-Flag and have supported the band and everything you've created along the way are okay with that, because that is what, you as a band, as a group of people, and ultimately as a brand, even though it changes and has different errors, is really good at doing, is saying, hey, we are here. You can rely on us, if for nothing else, but for, to always be authentic and always be very genuine and always have that vision. And there might be different ways that you put it out there. And sure, that's in the same way that every record changes, because the scope of what's happening around you that informs the, the things that to talk about changes. Right. And that's, I think, a lot of, you mentioned, and that's very kind of you to mention in terms of things that are done with Wonder Years. And yeah, to my credit, Dan and the rest of us, we are very proud of what we've been able to create. And I think we're also grateful and aware of the fact that you only start to get that when the years start adding up. If you plant an Easter egg on album 1, it's not really an Easter egg. It's just there, unless you're, self-referential from like song 1 to, to the end, but that in its way is its own, each one of their own ecosystem. So yeah, it's like the digital age, it's like, it's a different place, and it's harder to give that tangible experience. But there's a way where if you figure out how to do that, I mean, hell, it's like producing has now, Tom and I joke about it all the time. It's like, it's turned to this, it's like the pandemic turned it to well, what can I get done remotely? That's the next best thing to being in a room next to a creative collaborator, right? And in this way, it's like, I love it because it's beautiful. And even what things like this stencil did for that record and your community was give them effectively a pass to be like, you are now a collaborator with Anti-Flag, and that's really powerful.
And not to mention, I mean, there were just so many disconnects when, if you go from that period to now, for example, in our major label contract, we own the vinyl rights for Blood and Empire. So I put that out on AF Records ourselves. And you fast forward to 2022, could you imagine a major label giving away vinyl?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, it wasn't on their radar. And so we're dealing with that all the time. It's just because it's not on everyone's radar doesn't mean it's not working in concert with something else. And so I do believe that you're right. Maybe I kind of went on that little diatribe break because it's something I'm like staring in the face at this very moment.
You're in it right now. Yeah.
Yeah. But ultimately, I do agree with you that intention is going to lead the way consistently. It's so far out of any of our control as to whether or not anyone else gets it. All that we can do is use the tools within our grasp and within our reach. And ultimately, all Anti-Flag is trying to do is to use those tools to regress suffering. If we can alleviate any amount of suffering, no matter how heavy or how light, we are moving forward. And that's just the mantra of the band. And that's been the mantra of the band since day one. The band is called Anti-Flag because there were people at punk rock shows saying the Pledge of Allegiance, signing up to join the military. And we felt that was an abomination, that young people were cannon fodder for a ruling corporate class. And that's what war in America was leading to. You fast forward to today, we were unfortunately proven right about a lot of that stuff. And I wish that a lot of these songs had less relevance. I wish that, we could talk about the bass tone on For Blood and Empire because it's sick. But it's not
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's less valuable than the other shit. Around that time, I read this interview in Guitar World with Weezer and whoever the newest bass player of Weezer was at that time. And they were like, what amp do you use? And he said, a big one. And what guitar do you use? And he said, a black one. And I was like, that's how I want to do this.
Hell yeah. Dude, well, you know what? I mean, for you, I'm just like, hey, it needs to have enough speakers so that when I jump off of it, my hang time is at least 3.5 seconds to time it correctly. So what do you got? What models do you have? No, dude, and maybe we'll save that gear talk for the Gear Candy segment, which is a perfect time to dive deep into that and what an appropriate voice to speak on that. But for now, yes, it is all relevant in that way in terms of the album.
Yeah, and Chris, I just want to say, being a fan of Anti-Flag, I always I feel like the brand that y'all bring to the table is always a very reliable and knowledgeable source. It's very apparent on every release that y'all do that the time is put in and the why and the guttural feeling of all of the messages that you're portraying are coming through in that story, and to your point, the song itself. And so I just want to tack that on because it's so important, and I can't wait to get into the bass tone. The bass tone's sick, but the vehicle. The vehicle is exceptional throughout.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate that it comes across that way. It's the only way we know how to do it. Like for us, when we talk about the songs, I literally will write a lyric or a part or a section, and it doesn't matter. It changes them every day. Someone just says, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And so if I don't have that answer, we try to beat it, and so I think that's essentially how we just work as a group. And so it's less thought out than maybe it comes across. I guess my point is it's It's not like, yo, we're going to put this in here so people think we're smart.
Yeah.
We're just challenging each other.
And that comes across because like if you're like, how can I write a political anthem?
You know how you have to do that? You got to go get pissed off. Right? Like that. Like literally, like that's it. Or and that's why I think maybe it comes down to, Tom, what you're circling around right now is just the idea of like the conviction that is inherently there and shared by all of you in each of those songs, in each of those records. And then the recording of which it's like, that's how everybody's like, well, how do I sell this as like a real professional record and like make people feel something, right? Like elicit a reaction. That's the whole point of art, right? You are telling a story that you want to elicit a reaction, right? Whether that's somebody else to be equally as pissed off about something that's happening, right? And that is, dude,
that polarization is the backbone of
that is the conviction, right? Like, and that's why the notes do matter, but and they matter just as much where you don't have to think about it, right? And maybe why it doesn't get as much weight sometimes, unfortunately so, because it is there because there's this inherent instinctual feeling that goes into the craft of recording those, of playing those live, right? So, and that's there, and that's super important.
Sort of a tie-in to all of these things. And again, it's because I literally approved a master like 48 hours ago.
Yeah, dude.
This is on the tip of my tongue, but like For Blood and Empire was the first record that had any type of feature, and Morello played guitar on it. And then we did an interview with Congressman Jim McDermott, and that's on the record. And so that was our first kind of foyer into doing that. And we've done it a little bit since, where we just call a friend up. We're like, hey, I wrote this vocal part. I think it would sound better if you sing it. Or, wrote this space for a guitar solo. It'd be better if you played it. On this newest record, we've got 8 people that appear on 7 songs of an 11-song record. And it's funny because every one of them has come and said, well, what's the song about? And I've been able to give them the essays and the whole lyrics and the whole thing. I realized that it is a very specific to Anti-Flag question, because they're like, someone's going to ask me about the politics of this song and I need an answer. And I was thinking to myself, like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that to you, but now some other people get to share in our world. So
no, and I was going to say, it's like, I can't wait to hear those features also. Yeah. Wow. What a little breadcrumb into, a little sneak peek at that. So, but what it does is probably also, without really knowing it or intending it this way, it is the inspiration. It is the director for pulling out whatever performance is going to go into that, right? Even if just so subtly. And I love that, because that's, in that way, it is the driving force of the notes and of the parts and of those features. And it's so cool. And it never feels over thought out, which I think is important in terms of that. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, there are some, hey, we were just listening, the bass part, the bass part in the end, very cool line, like super, like Tom and I were, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that there are not great parts, it's that none of them sound like, try to overcomplicate it there. You know what I mean? Like, you never get that from an Anti-Flag record. And I love that. And I think your fans love that about it, because it feels like this whole package that everything comes together seemingly effortlessly, and so perfectly in its way, I
feel like when the message gets forced via an outside source, or just like vapid, not being as knowledgeable or as into it, like not feeling it.
Well, I think, yeah, what you're talking about is like there's real passion behind it, and that's what's leading, versus sometimes there's a fashion, and like we experienced that pretty heavily, 2004 Warped Tour, where it was leading into the re-election campaign of George W. Bush. And you had folks who were never political activists, being political activists on the Warped Tour stage. I will never speak ill of anyone who does that, because I saw firsthand a bunch of people become activated, and they'll say things like, well, I saw yellow card at Warped Tour and they told me to vote or whatever. But now they're 20 or 18 years later, they're still involved in the activism. They took the good part away. And so for me, it's not whether or not anybody else is doing it the same way that we're doing
Yeah.
it, or an inauthentic way versus our way is more authentic. I've got very little time for that discussion. The thing that I'm most concerned with is, what were we doing to alleviate suffering at that
Of
moment?
course.
And people were pulling on the rope the same way. And that to me is a memorable time. And I wish that some of that activism had a little bit more of a staying power. Maybe we wouldn't be in some of the predicaments that we find ourselves in today. Sometimes it feels very lonely, especially in the sheer volume of the internet, the loudness of the internet. You can't put anything online without someone telling you you're a fucking idiot, or the vaccine's going to kill you, or something insane. And that's frankly scaring a lot of artists from taking stances on things. And so it feels very akin to a 2002 post 9/11 world where Anti-Flag was kind of on an island a little bit. But then you have the counter of that, which was the summer of 2020, and the amount of people that were involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, and the amount of people who wanted to challenge racist white supremacist systems and policing in America. And I think that we're dealing with cultural shifts. And when you have cultural shifts, there's a lot of growing pains. The phrase is that the arc of history bends towards justice. I'm afraid it's taken a little too long. And some of us need to reach up and grab that motherfucker and bend it. And so that's what we're trying to do as a band. And ultimately, it's out of our control what others are doing. So I do want to give love and respect to all people, especially like you folks who are allowing me to talk about these things in a place that they probably don't get discussed a lot. And I think that's the value of what I do. And I see it and I know it. And I've got those years that you're talking about of perspective to look back and say, well, this was a valuable use of my time. I don't know if the record will do anything. I hope that, someone trips over it and the end of the Planet of the Apes when the Statue of Liberty's in the sand and like, oh, well, at least these four guys tried. That's all I can say is that we tried, and whether or not it lasts longer than myself, that's always the goal. That's the goal of the art that you create, Casey. That's the goal of anybody who puts a pen to paper or, writes a song or cares to share something that's bigger than themselves, is that they hope it lasts longer than their physical self does.
Incredibly well said,
wow.
Chris. I mean, what a true treat. Anybody, like everybody that's listening to this, whether, coming online and being familiar with Anti-Flag or this record itself, if for some reason you're not, please go listen to it. And all of this will make so much more sense. But I would venture to guess that it already has made quite an impact, Chris. And maybe it's not necessarily in many of the ways of artists become quite sought after, or their work does, posthumously. Maybe it's not necessarily for us to know right now the impact or to ever know, but you got in the arena and you stepped in there and did it. And that in and of itself is, and I think what your band musically stand for and have created, and the body of work that continues to grow with this next record, which we look forward to hearing more about very soon, so I'm told. It is something that even the actions themselves and the confidence and the courage themselves of being able to be creative and tell those stories is actually inspiration even before the songs hit, right? And that's, I think, what we're learning, what your band has taught people like me and Tom and people that are listening right now, I'm sure. And part of the reason why it was such an honor to have you here to talk through this record in that place in time and how it relates to everything y'all have done, because it's incredible. I commend you, and I thank you so much for your time here today, dude.
Honestly, it's an honor and a privilege to just hang out with people who care about the art and not just the superficial side of it. I think that these deep dives are important because especially in a digital age, people pour their heart and souls into this shit, and it gets listened to on a playlist once and then someone moves on, and that's the internet, and the technology is a great equalizer. And I believe that we will look back on it all and say it was important and helpful. And, like you were talking about the pandemic and getting together with ways that we've been able to get together that we weren't able to before. I think that it's not just about disinformation. It's not just about fucking Russian trolls or whatever the fuck it is. Like, there's real good shit. And like, we can communicate with people all around the world and identify with their struggles and lift them up. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's what we should be using these tools for. So I'm grateful to spend the time with you. I'd make these records whether anybody listened to them or not. And so we're anytime somebody does, and anytime we get to talk about it, it's an absolute honor. I didn't think I'd play a show outside of my mom's garage. So like, I'm in fucking somewhere in the UK. We're Kiss. We made it, bro. It's okay. I'm not worried about it.
That's right. None of us did. And look at us now, Mom. Well, Chris, thanks again, man. Stay safe over there. Enjoy the fest. Enjoy the rest of the tour. And we will catch up soon when you're back stateside. All right.
Yeah. Awesome. Great to meet you, Tom.
Nice meeting you, bud.
Chris mentioned something at the end of that interview that I thought was really powerful. He was talking about having musicians feature on their upcoming album and how inevitably when they reach out to someone to potentially do a feature, the first question that person will ask is, well, what's the song about? And he said that they are always ready, in true anti-flag fashion, to give a full, concise, well thought out, well researched vision of what the song and the message is about. And I thought that rings so true and says so much about them as a band and them as people, because they're really the perfect example of understanding and truly embodying the why behind what you do, behind what music you create, and realizing that what they are ultimately after is bigger than any one song. It's bigger than any band. It's a collective movement and what they hope their music and their art can inspire, and the change that they hope to see in the world. And I think that's such a powerful motivator that we can all remember and hopefully find within ourselves on whatever journey we end up on. And I love that about him. I love that about the band. And I think that's a huge reason why the band is still going strong this many decades later. So I truly hope you enjoyed this interview as much as we did. There's a ton of new stuff we have in store for you on this season, so please go check it out in the show notes, and we will see you next time on The Record Process.